I'm here at the Ad Operations Summit, and our town halls have just concluded. Here with me are the speakers who are engaged within those sessions. We'll hear from Freewheel on getting video to scale.
We talked about three key areas in getting video to scale. The first is around content. So what are the types of content that we're seeing in the video space growing over time? Devices, how are viewers and users engaging with their content across mobile, connected TV, and tablet? And then we got into, ultimately, how does all this get operationalized? So workflow considerations as you build out your video business.
Content, there's a lot of things to consider. Most importantly is the length of that content. Are we dealing with short form? Are we dealing with long form? Are we dealing with live? Three very different aspects of the way we can monetize the content that's out there. Starting with short form, managing user experiences across devices, I think, is something that all publishers have to consider. It can be somewhat of a challenge, but we need to think about how are we best serving the advertiser, best serving the user in an experience that supports that content and makes it a pleasurable experience. Long form, is the TV ad load the right ad load? So again, a lot of things that I think we question and you guys are thinking about on your end too is what is that perfect balance between whether it's the full linear ad load in between our commercial breaks, or is it something that's a little shorter to produce maybe a higher engagement? I think there's a lot of pros and cons on each side. It's open-ended and a lot of work is being done by publishers like us to find that sweet spot. And then live, again, that's very difficult unto itself because you have a very unique environment where you're monetizing a huge spike in traffic potentially, and you have an experience where the user is very engaged. They came there specifically to see that live content, so you want to make sure you deliver the best ad experience.
Yep. So that was the content section. The next section we talked about was device, and I think there's a lot of talk around growth in mobile engagement, around tablet, around connected TV, so something like an Xbox or a Roku or a PlayStation. One of the things that we've seen at Freewheel is that even though we see so much talk about the engagement there, we still see about 3/4 of our volume coming through the desktop environment. So we had a really good discussion around, well, where is that trending and what are the changes we expect and how do these other devices ultimately get to scale? So, maybe Adam, talk through some of the things we heard from the team.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons we can see that maybe desktop usage is still pretty high given the overall shift we can see in some of the other devices. And I think the big thing there is measurement, big things like audience measurement with VCE and OCR, tracking in very specific controlled manners. It's all very easy to still do within a browser on a PC. Mobile tablet, generally speaking, those might be better platforms for shorter content where you can have a user seeing a lot of short clips in rapid succession. Challenges there also is you have fragile environments, with those mobile tablet players. And then connected TV, there's a huge growth. We see a lot of shift happening in that direction, but it's a very unmeasurable environment right now, and I think that's a challenge. As publishers, we want to utilize our total audience across all these platforms and devices as much as possible. And I think where the advertisers are coming from is they want to be able to deliver to all these audiences, but they want to make sure that they're getting a return and they're able to measure on these platforms. And because that's still very much concentrated in the desktop platform, I think that speaks to why those numbers are still a little higher than maybe we've anticipated at this point.
Yep. So, and then lastly, this was a lot of what we just talked about was the market. So what content are we seeing growing? What devices are we seeing growing? I think the last was taking more of an internal look. So for a lot of premium publishers out there, how do we think about the workflow that we need to build to get to scale? So we talked a lot about forecasting, trafficking, and delivery management, and a lot of stuff that's very relevant today at the AdOps conference. So maybe just quick couple points around those topics.
Yeah, forecasting is of utmost importance, but also very challenging. We have a limited access to various measurements, and I think the more we start to think about how to maximize our utilization, and we start thinking about that up front when we're trying to make these big decisions with our forecasting, the more on point we have to be, but also the more challenging that becomes as you're thinking about your overall capacity, sometimes 6, 9, 12 months out before you're actually delivering on that deal. Trafficking, still very manual. I think there's some open-endedness to our side of the industry and the publishing end to seeing how programmatic can help. There's still some challenges there that we want to be very protective of the ad environment for both our customers and our advertisers and the users as well. But ultimately, we want to see how can we simplify the very manual trafficking process. And again, going back to the measurement conversation we just had, because of the inability to measure across some of these platforms, it makes it extremely manual to break out so you can have the right creative with the right, if at all, measurable tracking delivered to those platforms. And lastly, delivery management. We look at this as a kind of collective piece between our groups, at least at NBC Universal, and I think a lot of other publishers try to do this way as well. But it's a collective check and balance between sales, planning, and operations. It's kind of a team effort. You want to make sure that sales and planning is checking your tracking as soon as you go live, but you want to make sure operations is very heavily involved in making sure delivery is happening throughout the life of that campaign and are connected to our vendors when we do have issues so we can solve them as quickly as possible.
So, yep, that was a lot of what we covered. I think, in closing, the question for us is the digital video market, depending on who you talk to, it's $3 to $5 billion. That's compared to 70 billion maybe for linear, maybe double that, maybe 10 to 12 for digital. The question is, at what point does the industry really get to scale? I think what we've heard is that there's a lot of movement around measurement, there's a lot of movement around new devices and new content. I think all publishers that we're working with at Freewheel are now really starting to think about a lot of these workflow considerations as they move their businesses to scale.